You reach for that same bottle of oil sitting next to your stove, the one that's been there for months. You pour it into the hot pan without thinking twice, the way you have for 50 years. And in that one ordinary moment, you may be doing more quiet damage to your heart than a plate of bacon ever could. I didn't believe that at first. I thought oil was oil. I thought the label told me everything I needed to know. But I started pulling on a thread, and what unraveled left me standing in my own kitchen, staring at a bottle I'd trusted my whole life, wondering how nobody ever told me. Here's what I found, and I'll prove every word of it. There's a Spanish university study from 2012 that measured exactly what happens inside common cooking oils when we heat them the way our mothers did. What they found has a name. It has a chemistry. And it points to 5 specific mistakes that most people over 70 make every single day. Stay with me because the last one is the simplest to fix and it costs you nothing but a change of habit. This isn't for people with fancy kitchens. This is for you right now with the pan you already own and the bottle you already bought. Let me take you back to the morning this started. I was frying 2 eggs, and I noticed the oil in the pan had a smell. Not a strong smell, just a faint, sharp, almost metallic edge that caught the back of my throat. I'd smelled it 100 times and ignored it, but that morning, for some reason, I didn't ignore it. I turned off the burner, and I started asking questions I couldn't stop asking. The first question was simple. What is that smell? Because I always assumed a smell meant the food was cooking. But that sharp edge wasn't the eggs. It was the oil itself breaking apart under the heat. And when I looked into what breaking apart actually means, I found the work of researchers at the University of the Basque Country in Spain. Back in 2012, they heated ordinary cooking oils and tracked what came out of them as the temperature climbed. What they discovered is that when certain oils get hot enough, they release compounds called aldehydes. Now, that's a chemistry word, and I almost clicked away when I first read it. But hold on, because this matters more than any word on any label. These aldehydes are linked in study after study to the exact things we fear most after 70. Heart disease, clogged arteries, the slow damage that doesn't announce itself until it's too late. And here's the part that stopped me cold. The oils that produce the most of these harmful compounds were often the very ones marketed to us for decades as the healthy choice, the light, golden vegetable oils, the ones I'd been told to switch to. So I understood the smell now. It wasn't cooking. It was a warning. But that only opened a bigger door, because if the oil itself was the problem, then the real question wasn't which oil I bought. It was what I was doing to it. And that's mistake number 1. The first mistake is heat. Not heat in general, but pushing an oil past the point it can handle. Every oil has a number. It's called the smoke point, and it's the temperature where the oil stops cooking your food and starts destroying itself. When you see that thin blue haze rising off the pan, that isn't a sign it's ready. That's the oil beginning to fall apart at the molecular level, throwing off those aldehydes the Spanish researchers measured. Here's what nobody told me. A refined oil with a delicate makeup, like a lot of the corn and soybean and generic vegetable oils sitting in kitchens all over this country, has a lot of what chemists call polyunsaturated fats. Those fats are fragile. They break down fast under high heat. And the higher you crank that burner, the more of the harmful stuff you create. Now compare that to how our grandmothers cooked. My grandmother fried in lard or in bacon drippings she kept in a tin can right by the stove. And for years, the modern world told us she was slowly killing herself, but those animal fats and the stable oils she used had a very different structure. They were what's called saturated or monounsaturated, and those hold together under heat far better. They don't shatter into as many toxic byproducts. So what do you actually do about it? You stop cooking on high with the wrong oil. For anything hot, anything you're searing or frying. You want an oil that stays stable. And you keep the flame lower than you think you need. If you see smoke, that oil is already ruined. Throw it out and start over. That smoke isn't flavor, it's damage you're about to eat. I felt good for a minute, thinking I'd solved it. Just don't overheat the oil. Simple. But then a nagging thought crept in, because plenty of damage was happening in kitchens where nobody ever cranked the heat that high. There had to be another way this was getting into people. And when I found it, I realized the danger didn't need high heat at all. It just needed time. That's mistake number 2, and it might be the most common one in America: reusing oil. Frying something once, letting the oil cool, and pouring it back into a jar to use again tomorrow. My father did this his whole life. There was a coffee can under the sink, and the oil went round and round until it was dark as tea. Waste not, want not. I respected that. I still do. But here's what that thrift was costing him, and he never knew. Every time you heat an oil and cool it and heat it again, the damage stacks. The oxidation compounds in each cycle produces more of those harmful aldehydes than the last. Researchers have measured this directly. Oil that's been used several times carries dramatically higher levels of oxidized compounds than fresh oil. And there's one in particular I need you to remember because it became the center of everything I dug up. It's called 4-hydroxynonenal. The scientists shorten it to HNE. It forms when polyunsaturated oils break down under repeated heating, and it is stubborn. It doesn't cook away. It builds up in the oil, and then it builds up in you. Studies have connected this specific compound to hardening of the arteries, to inflammation, and to the kind of cellular damage that sits underneath most heart trouble after 70. So my father's coffee can of golden oil, saved so carefully, was slowly turning into something the human body was never built to handle. And the terrible irony is that the more careful and frugal you are, the worse it gets, because the frugal person reuses the most. What do? If you fry, use the oil once and let it go. I know that's hard for a generation that saved rubber bands and washed out plastic bags. I fought it myself. But this is one place where the old thrift works against you. And if you must reuse it, never more than once. Never if it's darkened, and never if it smells like that sharp edge I told you about. I thought I had the picture now. Don't overheat it, don't reuse it. But I still hadn't answered the question that started all of this. Because the bottle by my stove that morning had smelled wrong, and I hadn't heated it at all that day. It had just been sitting there, which meant oil could go bad doing absolutely nothing. And that led me straight into the third mistake, the one hiding in plain sight on nearly every kitchen counter in the country. Mistake number 3 is where you keep the bottle. Right there, next to the stove, in the light, where it's warm and convenient. I always kept mine there because it made sense. That's where I cook. But it turns out those are the 3 exact conditions that spoil oil without a single flame touching it: heat, light, and air. Chemists call the process oxidation, and it's the same thing that turns a cut apple brown and rusts a nail. Left in warmth and daylight, oil goes rancid on its own, quietly, over weeks and months. And rancid doesn't always mean it stinks so bad you'd notice. In the early stages, it's subtle. That faint metallic edge, a slightly bitter taste you blame on the food. But by then, the oil is already carrying the same kinds of oxidized compounds that repeated frying creates. You don't have to abuse the oil to make it dangerous. You just have to store it wrong and wait. I went looking for how people handled this before refrigerators and clear plastic bottles, and what I found made me feel foolish. For centuries, oil was kept in dark clay vessels, in stone cellars, in tinted glass, in the coolest, darkest corner of the house. They didn't know the chemistry. They didn't have a word like oxidation. But they knew that oil kept in the light and the heat turned on you. That knowledge was so ordinary it never got written in a headline. It just got passed down, and then Somewhere in the last few generations, it got dropped. Here's exactly what to do, and it costs you nothing. Move your oil off the counter and away from the stove today. Put it in a cool, dark cupboard. If your oil comes in clear glass or clear plastic, that's worse because light gets right through. So keep it somewhere with no light at all. Buy smaller bottles so you use them up before they turn. And if you have a bottle that's been open more than a few months and sitting in the light, smell it. If it's got that sharp, waxy crayon like edge, it's already gone. Pour it out. That felt like a real answer. But it also raised something darker. Because if oil spoiling in the light was this well understood for this long, why were we all sold clear bottles and told to keep the healthy oils front and center? Who benefited from us forgetting what every grandmother once knew? I wasn't ready to answer that yet, but the question had teeth now, and it pulled me into the fourth mistake, which is the one that made me genuinely angry. Mistake number 4 is trusting the word on the front of the label instead of understanding what's really in the bottle. For most of my adult life, I was told a story. The story went like this. Animal fats are bad, butter is bad, lard is bad. Switch to vegetable oils, the light golden ones, and your heart will thank you. I believed it. Most of us did. We threw out the drippings and filled our pantries with the new oils. And that right there is the whole reason I started writing everything down instead of just keeping it in my head. Every one of these small kitchen truths, the ones nobody sat you down to explain, I've gathered into 3 books I wrote myself for people over 65 who want to read their own body and their own kitchen without waiting on a 12-minute appointment. It's more than 500 pages of the same kind of digging you're hearing right now, only slower and deeper, with the heart and kidney signals, the deficiencies that hide for years, and the questions to ask before anyone talks you into a procedure. If that's the kind of knowing you want in your hands, scan the QR code right there on your screen, link in the description, pinned comment, and the books are yours. Now let me show you what I found when I went looking for how people kept oil safe before any of us had a refrigerator. So I went back to find where that story started. And the trail led to a researcher named Ansel Keys in the middle of the last century, back in the 1950s and 60s, when the idea took hold that saturated fat was the great enemy of the heart. That single idea reshaped how an entire country cooked. It emptied the lard tins and filled the shelves with processed vegetable oils. It felt like progress. But here's what the newer research keeps circling back to, and what those Spanish scientists made impossible to ignore. Many of those replacement oils, the fragile polyunsaturated ones, are the very oils that break down fastest under heat and time, throwing off the harmful compounds I've been describing. We traded a fat that was stable in the pan for fats that fall apart in the pan. And we did it believing we were protecting our hearts. Now, I want to be careful and honest here because I'm not telling you to go drink a cup of bacon grease. That's not the lesson. The lesson is that the label lied by leaving things out. A bottle that says heart healthy in big letters tells you nothing about how that oil behaves when it's hot, or how fast it spoils, or how many of those aldehydes it produces on your stove. The front of the bottle is marketing. The truth is in the chemistry. And the chemistry was never printed where you could read it. So what do you actually reach for? You want oils built to survive. Extra virgin olive oil, despite everything you were told, holds up remarkably well because of its structure and its natural protective compounds. For higher heat, stable choices like avocado oil do far better than the fragile golden oils. And the traditional fats our grandparents used in moderation were never the villains they were made out to be. The point isn't one perfect oil. The point is that you now know to ask the question the label never wanted you to ask. I sat with that for a while, and I'll be honest, it stung. All those years of doing what I was told, and the telling was built on a shaky foundation. But then a voice in my head spoke up, and maybe it's speaking in yours right now. Maybe you're thinking, this is fine for people with money, people who can afford 3 different fancy oils and a pantry to store them in. Maybe you live in one room, on a fixed income, with 1 bottle to your name. So Let me stop everything right here because this next part is built specifically for you. You do not need to buy a single new thing to protect yourself starting today. Not one bottle, not one gadget. The most powerful fixes I found are all about what you do with what you already have. Here's the first one, and it's free. Use less oil and add it later. So much of the damage comes from oil sitting in a screaming hot, dry pan, smoking before the food ever hits it. Instead, put a little water or a splash of broth in the pan first to get things going, and add your oil toward the end, off the highest heat. You cook the food, not the oil. That one change cuts down the harmful compounds dramatically, and it stretches your bottle further, so it saves you money at the same time. Here's the second free fix. Wipe the pan between uses instead of letting old, burnt oil residue sit and recook. That dark film baked onto a pan is oxidized oil, and every time you heat it, it contaminates the fresh oil you just added. A cheap paper towel in 30 seconds solves it. Here's the third, and it costs nothing but attention. Trust your nose, the way people did before there were expiration dates on anything. Before you cook, smell the oil. Fresh oil smells clean or faintly like the plant it came from. Bad oil smells sharp, waxy, like old crayons or paint. If your nose pulls back, so should you. Your grandmother didn't have a lab. She had her nose, and it kept her family safe for decades. And here's the fourth, maybe the most important one for anyone counting every dollar. Stop buying the biggest bottle to save money. I know it feels thrifty, but a giant bottle of oil that sits open for a year, slowly oxidizing in your cupboard, is a false saving. You're paying less per ounce for oil that's turning against you by the time you reach the bottom. A smaller bottle you finish while it's fresh is the real economy. That's the kind of math the old-timers understood in their bones. None of that requires a fancy kitchen. It requires knowing what I've just told you. And I promise, if you do only these free things, you're already ahead of most people half your age. But I saved the best for last, because everything I dug up was pointing toward one final discovery. One simple thing that ties it all together. The thing that made me put down my research and walk straight to my kitchen to do it that very night. This is the fifth mistake, and it's the secret that undoes the other four. Let me bring you all the way back to that Spanish study and to what the researchers actually recommended once they'd measured all the damage. Because it's one thing to know oils break down. It's another to know exactly how to stop it in your own home tonight for free. Here is what I found, and I want you to really hear it because almost nobody talks about it. The single biggest thing you can do to protect the oil, and therefore your heart, is to control air and light on the bottle you already own. And there's a specific way to do it that our grandparents did without thinking that got completely lost. First, the air. Every time you open that bottle, oxygen rushes in and sits on top of the oil, quietly oxidizing it between uses. A bottle that's half empty is half full of air, working on your oil around the clock. So here is the trick. As you use an oil down, transfer what's left into a smaller container so there's almost no airspace above it. Fill it near the top. Less air touching the oil means less oxidation and oil that stays good for months instead of weeks. People used to pour oil into smaller and smaller vessels as they used it, and they were right. They just didn't know the chemistry proving them right. Second, the light and heat sealed together with the air. Take that smaller, nearly full container and keep it capped tight in the dark and cool. Not by the warm stove, not on the sunny windowsill, in the coolest dark cupboard you have. For some oils, even the refrigerator, and don't worry if it goes cloudy in the cold, that's harmless and it clears right up at room temperature. Cold, dark, and sealed is the exact opposite of hot, bright, and open. It's the difference between oil that protects you and oil that slowly harms you. And here's the part that gave me chills when I put it together. This is precisely how oil was stored for thousands of years before we knew a single word of the science. Dark vessels, cool cellars, filled to the top and sealed, small amounts used fresh. The ancient people who lived longest around the Mediterranean, the ones whose diet everyone praises today, weren't just eating good oil. They were storing it the way that kept it from ever turning. The wisdom wasn't only in what they ate, it was in how they kept it. And that half of the secret got buried under clear plastic bottles and giant warehouse store jugs, and the convenience of leaving it out on the counter. So the reason this was lost isn't a mystery anymore. Small, fresh, dark stored oil doesn't sell as well as the big bottle you'll replace after it spoils. Clear bottles look pretty on a shelf and let you see the pretty golden color, even though clear is exactly what harms the oil. Convenience by the stove sells more oil than a bottle tucked away in a cold cupboard. Nobody sat you down and lied to your face. They just designed everything around selling more, and the old knowledge of how to keep oil alive simply wasn't profitable to remind you of, so it faded. And your heart paid the difference. But now you have it back. Tonight, before bed, you can walk into your kitchen and do all of it. Move the bottle off the counter. Pour it into something smaller and fill it near the top. Cap it tight. Put it somewhere cool and dark. Smell it first every time you cook. Use less, add it later, keep the pan clean, and never let it smoke. Not one of those steps costs $1. And together, they undo the quiet damage that most people your age will keep doing every single day for the rest of their lives, never knowing why their hearts kept getting worse. That's what the investigation gave me back. Not fear, the opposite of fear. It gave me the quiet certainty that I'm not helpless, that a bottle of oil isn't a mystery I have to trust blindly, that the people who came before me knew something real and I could have it too, just by paying attention. And that's who you are. If you've stayed with me this far, you're someone who would rather understand the chemistry than believe the label. Someone who trusts evidence over a pretty word printed in big letters. Someone who suspects, correctly, that a lot of what we were sold as progress quietly took something better away. You didn't get here by being gullible. You got here by asking the same kind of question I asked over 2 frying eggs on an ordinary morning. So let me ask you one thing, and I really want your answer. That coffee can of saved frying oil under the sink, or the bottle that's been sitting by your stove in the light for who knows how long. Did you have one? Do you have one right now? Tell me in the comments where your oil has been living all this time, on the counter, by the window, under the sink, and tell me where you're watching from. I read them, and I want to know how many of us were doing the exact same thing without ever being told. And if this pulled back a curtain for you, come deeper with us. This is a place for people quietly digging up the practical knowledge earlier generations relied on before all of it got buried under products and fees and needless complication. Because the next thing I went looking for surprised me even more than the oil did. It's about something almost every one of us keeps in the refrigerator door, in the very spot that ruins it fastest, and what our grandparents did instead. I found the document that proves it, and once you see it, you'll never store it that way again. Stay with me. The trail isn't finished yet. Before you go, one more thing. Everything today was just the overview. Inside the Wise Living Circle, I take you further, fixing each of those mistakes step by step. And if something's unclear, you can ask me directly, and a real person, me, answers you myself. You won't be doing this alone. Folks just like you are already inside. Just point your phone's camera at the code on your screen. Cancel any time with one click. I'd love to see you there. Now that you know the truth about oils, there's another everyday food quietly working against you. Eggs. The next one shows you 7 simple mistakes to avoid, so your body stays stronger after 70. It's starting right here.